Hello, this is A Christian Man Loves Science, second video. For those of you who watched my first video, thank you for watching. So these videos, I started my video before this one. I started doing these videos because I wanted to talk about how my beliefs in God and my love of science can work together, and they don't work against each other. We talked about the origins of the universe, and how, from a scientific point of view, that can align with a belief in God quite naturally. Yeah, we're going to go on today to the biological origins on planet Earth and how that fits in with a world where God does exist. We looked at how life on Earth is all carbon based, and that fits in nicely to this video. So within the scientific understanding, and the consensus is in the scientific community, is that life somehow started from a prebiotic soup of chemicals, and for some reason these chemicals became a molecule, a self-replicating molecule, and that was essentially the first life. And then obviously through a method of Darwinism, or the theory of Darwinism, it progressed into a more complex life over time, to where you see the diversity of life today. Now, the beginning is actually flawed, because we cannot prove this abiogenesis, or dead chemicals becoming life. That's what the scientific name is for it, abiogenesis. We've not proved that chemicals can become alive in any lab, even with all the resources we have, even with all the chemicals at our disposal. We cannot make life from chemicals. There was a scientist in the 20th century, or 21st century, sorry, who managed to enable amino acids, the building blocks of life. But that wasn't any sort of molecules. It was just amino acids. So far from a molecule that's self-replicating. Not only is this phenomenon very unlikely, if it did happen, this phenomenon only happened ever once. This abiogenesis, or dead chemicals becoming life, has only ever happened once, apparently, on Earth. It's never happened again. So there's not much evidence of dead chemicals becoming alive, because we haven't got any evidence. It's all assumption. And this is where Darwinism is flawed in the beginning, because Darwinism relies on just materials becoming more complex until you have biodiversity. So at stage one, Darwinism is flawed, and they're still trying to prove chemicals becoming alive even now. If you get onto the how then from a simple life form becomes more complex, Darwinism is again really relying on assumptions. There's no empirical evidence of observable evidence that we can see one specific type of species completely change over time. There is adaptation of animals, so you have the white tiger in a snow leopard in colder climates, and in warmer climates you have the normal leopard. And even with humans, those with dark skin live in hot countries, and those with paler skin live in colder countries. But this is adaptation of one species. This is not a species changing over time into another species. A lot of proponents of Darwinism would say, well, if you get enough time, something will completely change. But that's not, that's an assumption, because we haven't never observed this. There's no way to observe it, really. And there's no actually scientific empirical evidence of this happening. So stage one, from a scientific point of view, that we haven't proved chemicals become alive spontaneously. It's never been observed. It's just a belief, really. It's a leap of faith to believe that. And the second leap of faith is adaptation within a species can then become Darwinism. So a species, a frog over time will change into, something else. So again, from a purely scientific point of view, this is again where I think some scientists, some people who love science have hijacked, or atheism then, if you were, has hijacked science and said, well, science is on our side, when clearly, the evidence in front of us is, actually, we can't really explain how life began, number one. And number two, this what we call macroevolution, or species changing from one to another, is again an assumption. I think with some evidence, they've looked at morphological likenesses between different species. So, for instance, monkeys. If you've seen them in the textbooks in schools, they've got monkeys slowly becoming men. But again, this is just purely based on what we call a historical life science. It's not empirical. They've just looked at maybe the most likely explanation. But quite equally, that could be just, they're looking at common descent. It could equally be a common design, from a intelligent design. Yeah. So this could equally prove that there's a common design element to all biological diversity in life. So it's obviously a bit of an assumption to assume, just because something looks like something else, and even though there's a lot of differences between each of those fossils, that it merged. The fossil record is actually quite a lot of gaps. There's a load of gaps in the fossil record, so we're not seeing a plethora of fossils with incremental changes. We're seeing, the differences between each species in the fossil record, like humongous changes. The argument for this is because for people who are pro-Darwinists are saying that, just the fact that the other fossils didn't survive. But, but the fossil record is not very good. Even if you take into consideration some fossils may have not survived. From a biological genetic point of view, again, it's looking at morphological sequences between DNA. So you may have heard that we share, over 95% of our DNA with gorillas and monkeys, but we equally share 50% of our DNA with bananas. Again, think of it like this: if you had a Honda motorcycle and you had a Honda car, it's made from the same parts, but they're equally different machines. And a creator created them differently. So the same could be said through, we're made from the same stuff as other animals, but equally we're designed differently. And from a DNA point of view, it's actually quite it's not telling you the real big story, but when you hear about the morphological sequences of DNA between us and monkeys, for instance, it's actually the genetic expression of those genes. So it's actually found out that monkeys and humans are actually very, very differently made when it comes to the gene expression, and how those genes actually work. So again, the evidence isn't very strong in terms of should we say the genetic, just because there's sequences that are similar in different species, it still doesn't point towards a common descent. There's not a lot of evidence for that. DNA itself is very interesting. DNA actually, we still don't know, how DNA became. The reason we don't know this is you need a protein to make DNA, but yet you need DNA to make a protein. It's a bit like the chicken and egg scenario. And to this day, we still haven't figured out how DNA became, because you need protein to make DNA, but yet you need DNA to make a protein. Which came first? There's no way of knowing. DNA itself is very, very complex. It's what we call specified complexity. So you only see specified complexity in things like language, human language, computer code. What specified complexity means is it's not just complex in terms of the DNA code in everything we, from making my eyes brown to making my brain the way it is. There has to be very precise sequences of genetic code. But not only does this code have a specific sequence, it has to have a meaning, or it has to give a function. So for instance, if I wrote a book and 10 paragraphs long, the letters within the words I write have to give a function to make a word. Yeah. Equally, I could mumble up all those letters and still give you the same book. It would still have the same complexity, but it wouldn't have a meaning. Whereas DNA is like a book that has words. It's actually the codes actually give specific functions, and any other if any other sequence of that DNA, the gene won't work. So from a mathematical point of view, from looking at it as a functional code, DNA is actually more complex than any computer man has ever made. You may have heard of the scenario 2-bit code, which is in more modern day computers. It's actually DNA is 4-dimensional code, meaning it's 4-bit code. Sorry, making 3-dimensional structures. It's much more complex than any computer, any technology man has ever made. And all this technology, all this DNA technology, is all inside a single cell. It's known that this, when Darwin was alive, it was actually assumed that the single cell was just a globule of plasm. So it was just a ball of goo, basically. But it's now known that the single cell is a very, very complex machine, which has DNA code in it. The little machines and cells, it's far outweigh any technology man has ever made, of that sort of minuscule. If you think of nanotechnology, okay, this is much more better than nanotechnology. These little machines doing things that create to enable the cell to do things. So from a scientific point of view, DNA far outweighs any complexity we've ever seen, man-made. It's specified complexity, so it gives function. And as of yet, Darwinism cannot explain how this complexity became just in the beginning like that. There's theories of RNA, which is a backdrop of DNA. DNA includes RNA, but RNA is basically sort of a precursor to DNA. But even RNA is that complex as well. It has its own coding. So from a purely random chance Darwinistic point of view, it doesn't look like DNA happened that way. DNA is far too complex to be a random phenomenon, or a natural phenomenon. So let's summarize where we are with this. A universe that shouldn't exist, but it does exist, and the fact that the probabilities of such a universe existing and having a planet called Earth with a life on the way it is, from a scientific point of view, is mathematically impossible. And then on to the second video, we've talked about how what the impossibilities of, you know, life itself, the beginnings of life itself, and DNA, specifically DNA, and how DNA became, you know, cannot be explained from purely Darwinistic evolution point of view. So I think I might sort of end this second video on here on this note, because I want to keep this series going. So we've touched on the universe, we've touched on the biological complexities and so on, and the miracle of life. So hopefully you'll get a foundation of, you know, how I can tie in my beliefs, my belief in God with my scientific thoughts as well. And really, these videos are just to show people that, you know, being a Christian doesn't mean we're ignorant of the science, which I keep getting a lot. So I think I might end my second video here, because I don't want to pack too much into one video and bite size and make a series out of them. God bless you all. Peace.